Accounts Payable webinar for Visual ContrAcct. On Accounts Payable, you have vendors, and this is where you would enter and maintain your vendor IDs and your vendor information. Vendor ID is alphanumeric, and it will always be uppercase, so you could have a series of letters and numbers combination, but they have to be unique. They cannot be the same, you cannot use the same one twice. So you'll see here that in this vendor file list for this demo company, we have some that have letters and some that have numbers, and you can have a combination of both too, even though we don't have that. On the vendor, you have the name and address, city, state, and zip. They're basically the contact information. If you put in an email address, so if I put in my email address, it turns it blue, and that, if I click on that, that will open up my Outlook or whatever email program that you use and put that in the subject line as to who you're sending it to. Same with the website. If you put in a valid website, it will put that in blue, and if you click on that link, it would take you to the website. You have ways to track insurance certificates. With a lot of, sometimes your vendors may require them to have an insurance certificate on file, and you have to get an updated one every year when it expires. So you can check this box, put in an expiration date, and it would then show you or pop up a warning that their insurance certificate is getting ready to expire. We also have a Crystal report that you can print. And Crystal Reports is a third-party report writing software that integrates with our program. And so we have a Crystal report that you could print that shows you all of your vendors who are marked with insurance certificates required and what the expiration date is. When you're entering a new vendor, if you put in the zip code, the city, state, and phone number area codes will fill in automatically. So that was not there before. I just typed in the zip code without having to put the city, and it automatically will fill that in for you.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's a little trick that a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, I didn't know that one.
You have this copy address button, and what that does is it copies the vendor's name and address to a clipboard. And it's a behind-the-scenes clipboard that you can't see, and then you can paste it like into Word or into Excel if you want to print a label. So if I go ahead and click on copy address, and I can open up my Word, and then if I just paste, it gives me just the information that I've got in there because I don't have an actual address, but it also gives you their email. You can then edit this, and I could take off the email if I didn't want that on there. And I could then even add a line if I wanted to and put in their address. So then you could either address a letter or you can put it in Excel for labels, but it makes it editable that way. Page two of the vendor file is for billing information for each vendor. For example, some vendors may have a parent company that they bill through, so the billing vendor ID would be a vendor, again, but it would be the parent company. So you may purchase it from XYZ, but ABC company is the one that's going to that you're going to be paying for it or going to be getting the bill from. So this is just a way to track where that comes from. Now, this is one of the fields where you can use your F12 key, and the F12 key brings up a list of what that field is expecting you to put in it. In this case, it's expecting a vendor ID, so it's bringing up the vendor search list. And then you could go ahead and select that vendor. Federal tax ID.
I'm sorry, Lynn, that F12, does that work for the GL too?
It does. It works for the GL. Anything that has a search list, you can do F12 in. For example, this federal tax ID, I can't do F12 here because I don't have a list of federal tax IDs. I just type in whatever the tax ID is.
Right.
If I wanted to look up a purchase general ledger account and I wanted to set it to a certain GL account, I can do an F12 here, and it brings me to a list of my general ledger account numbers.
Great. Nice. Yeah.
So that F12 key is something that a lot of people don't know about either, where it will give you a search. You know, vendor account ID doesn't have a F12 key because that's just an account number. So it's not something that it can pull from the software. But if you're looking for a GL account number, a customer number, a vendor number, an employee number, a job number, phase number, you could hit F12 in those.
Right.
You don't have to have these fields filled in. It's just optional if you want us to default to a certain thing. The federal tax ID, if you're going to print 1099s for this vendor, you do need to have that filled in.
Okay.
If you use departments, you would have a list of departments in the drop-down, and if this vendor was associated with a certain department, you could select that here. A vendor account ID would just be whatever your account ID is with that vendor if you needed to track that. If you have a certain person that you contact to make purchases, and then how you prefer them to ship, and shipping terms, billing terms. If they offer you discounts, you would put the percentage here, and it's either going to be discount days, so you discount if you paid it within 10 days, or you discount on a day of the month. So, for example, they give you a discount if you paid by the 15th. You would put the day of the month as 15 in there. Or if they give you 10 days, you would put it as 10 days. And it can only be one or the other. It can't be both. Same with days until due. This is what the due date when you enter the invoice is going to default to. So days until due, it's either going to be due in 30 days or it's due on a certain day of the month. And you can set that per vendor. You got your tax statuses. You've got a lot of different options here. Some of them kind of mean the same thing, but some customers wanted to be called certain things and others have them called other things, so we try to accommodate as much as we can. 1099 code, if you are using 1099s for this vendor, then you would set the code. We currently print the Box 7 non-employee compensation. That's the most common one. You can use any of these codes, though, if you need to. State income, state tax withholding, and 1099 adjustment is all 1099 related. Where if you need to show a state income on there or state tax withheld, you would put dollars values in there. If you need to adjust the 1099s, for example, they're getting a 1099 for $1,000, but you only want them to get one for $700. You could put an adjustment of $300 in here, and it would take off the $300 from what they've got. Now, they do have to have existing AP checks in order to get a 1099. So you would have to have had at least one check record for the year for them in order to have it print a 1099 for the vendor. So it can't just be, for payments that for miscellaneous payments that didn't go through AP. You would have to actually have had a check in there. Miscellaneous code is just a miscellaneous code that you can enter. It doesn't really, it can be pulled into Crystal Reports, but it doesn't show up anywhere. And it does not do anything with F12. So print check detail. On the check stub, when you're printing a check, this shows what kind of detail do I want to see on my check stub for my paying my AP invoices. This is an F12 field. If I hit F12, I get two options. I can print either invoice totals, which is the first option there, which means it's going to put one line per invoice. So you're just going to see the invoice number, the date, and the amount. If I choose line item, which is print distributions, that will then print the job and the phase, if there was a job and a phase, on that individual invoice. So it will print then the detail, basically, the detail section of that, showing you the invoice and each job and phase separately and how much is going for each job and phase. Most of our clients use the print distributions just because it gives them the more detail that they need to see. The Notcha tab is for our electronic payment module. We have an electronic payment module for accounts payable where you can electronically process your checks and send them to the bank. This is you would check mark the box saying that this vendor is an electronic payment vendor, and then this would be the vendor's transaction code. Well, actually, the transaction code would be like 22, I think, for a checking account and 32 for savings. Most of the time, it would probably be checking. But then this is the vendor's routing number and the vendor's bank account number. And then this would be the electronic payment email address if you wanted to send the notifications to the vendor electronically by email. You would put that, fill that in here, and then they would get sent notification of it. We also, this part is grayed out, but you'll see there's a ESP. That's another way of doing electronic payments that you would have to check with your bank to see if you have that option for that, but that's another version of electronic payment filing or payments. Notes is just a place where you can type in any miscellaneous notes. It's a copy and paste option. It also shows up here in the notes section on the vendor information tab. It's the same thing, just a bigger area to store more notes. User fields is additional spots to store extra data. So if you need to store, like for example, in this company, we have a tax ID here, we have a start date here. You can store any, 4 date options, 4 number options, and the text options. These headings can be changed to be whatever you want them to be. It can be whatever label you want to call them. They will the label will be the same on all vendors, though, so it'll be uniform for every vendor. Once you change it on one, it changes it on all the rest of them. These can be printed, can be pulled into Crystal reports. So if you need to track certain things, or you're trying to keep track of some type of information, we can create Crystal reports that will pull this data. Up here on my toolbar, I'm going to use this red X, which is undo changes to the current record, because I don't want to save all the different things that I put in here. So if I undo that, then it puts it all back to the way it was when I first came in here. Okay, so the other thing that we have in vendors, if you use the binoculars and do a lookup, you'll see there is a Z vendor, and a vendor that has all Zs. This is what we call our default vendor. And so this vendor will hold all the defaults. So when you enter a new vendor, these defaults are automatically checkmarked. So when you enter a new vendor, this company is going to automatically have check detail as line item. It will automatically have due day of the month as 30. So you don't have to enter that in on every new vendor that you do. Defaults from this default vendor. We have that in accounts receivable, job cost. It's a lot more useful in those things where you always want the same things to default on your jobs. It works well to have it on there so that then you don't have to enter those in every time. And accounts payable invoices. You have your invoices that you enter in that you receive from your vendors. If you use the purchase order module, you might have a purchase order that you would put up in here. That purchase order would then go out and look at the purchase order file and pull in information from the purchase order to show on this new invoice. If you don't use purchase order, you would leave that blank. You would just put in your vendor. Your vendor is an F12 field again. The now, if I do a new one here, if I do F12 in purchase order, I can get a lookup of my purchase orders if I wanted to put a purchase order in here. If I do, then it defaults the vendor from that purchase order. And here's a message about the insurance certificate has expired for this vendor. So that's the message that you get when that insurance certificate is expired. So then I can put in my invoice number. I can put in my date. Now the invoice date, if it is, if I'm using today's date, I can hit a T and I can get today's date. If I'm using yesterday's date, I can hit a, if thought it was an R, but tomorrow's date is an M. How about a Y? Yep, Y for yesterday's date. Or I can just type in the date of the invoice. My accounting month and year will default to whatever my invoice is. Now the invoice amount is automatically coming in from the purchase order. If I didn't have a purchase order, I would type that in. I go to the next field, I've got a discount on this vendor, so it's automatically pulling that from the vendor file, 2% discount, calculates the discount amount. I can change this if I want to, say we're not taking a discount, I can make that change. I don't have to use that. My due date is defaulting to 30 days based on what my vendor file says. I can change that again if I want to. My discount date defaults, I can again change that if I need to. I would, receiving the purchase order on here, I would do the receive PO items. I click that button, it would take me to the purchase order. And let's say I'm receiving this first item. I could click this receive button, it would show me that it's received the 12 items that we've ordered and put my invoice number on there. I can say okay, yes, I want to save. Automatically will bring in this detail line from the purchase order with the job and the phase. I don't have to do anything else to it. There's two description fields for the AP invoice. This top description field and what we call this header section. That is kind of informational, doesn't really show anywhere, it's internal. This description in the detail section will show on the check stub. So if you need some kind of tax number or some sort of job or certain number go along with that job to show on the check stub, you put it in this description and that will show on any check stub that you print for this invoice. Now once I've saved this invoice, okay, so here's a good training thing. I put this PO, the total PO is $299.25. I only received one line of it of $96. So I would either have to receive the rest of the PO or change my amounts. In this case, I'm just going to change my amounts for this case. This vendor must be set, or this job must be set to be retention, have retention. So it's withholding $14.96 worth of retention. Down here, it seems I've got my invoice total and my net invoice, which is less my retention. If I save this invoice, I get the print check button that highlights. You can print a check from this invoice just for this one invoice. So you can go to any invoice in the system that hasn't had a check printed against it, and you can use the print check option. It'll just take you to the print check screen, and it'll give you, you have to verify your starting check number and your check date and your accounting month and year, but you can print a check automatically for that invoice without having to go through the select checks process. The only drawback is it just does one invoice at a time, so you can't print a check for multiple invoices using this feature. We have an invoice copy feature as well. If you click the invoice copy feature, you can copy this invoice to a second invoice with a different number. You can also date it a different date. If you have recurring invoices that you have to enter every month, this can be a useful feature because you can copy them to future months at the same time without having to remember to do it each month. You can set them up at the beginning of the year. And it just creates an invoice exactly like you see here. And then you can go to that invoice, that new invoice that you made. So if I were to type in new number and I were to say okay, I could use my binoculars and I could find that new invoice, and it's exactly the same. And then I could change any information that I wanted to. Delete that one. Okay. Also going to delete this one. And I'm going to remove the AP invoice from the purchase order, yes. When you have to make an adjustment to an invoice, the adjustments will show up in red. So like this first invoice has an adjustment on it because it's a red detail line. And this one had an adjustment as well. This one you see is the invoice has multiple distributions on it. It's going to 2 different jobs, and it's going to different phases. So then this would show you the adjustment, which job, which phase. We have the option to delete all adjustments. Check selected for payment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is this invoice here will allow me to change it because it says checks selected for payment. What that means is that in File, Accounts Payable, selects checks. This select check screen has been populated, and somebody has been trying to process payments. Okay. When you populate the select check screen, it locks down all the invoices that show up in here so that people can't change them while you're trying to pay them. Because if you allow somebody to change them while you're trying to pay them, you could be paying one amount and the invoice gets changed to a different amount, causing out of balances. So to clear the select check screen, you do a restart all. You're going to get this warning. That's going to tell you that all selected invoices will be cleared. And you're going to say yes. Then it's going to come up with this parameter screen, and you're going to say cancel. That will clear out all those vendors. Now, if I go off of this and back onto it, now this is white. The selected checks screen is, or the message up here that says it's selected for payment is there. And now I can get into my delete all adjustments button. So if I wanted to delete these adjustments, and that's if you made an adjustment and it's found out it was wrong, the only way to get rid of them is to delete them and start over again. So I could go to delete all adjustments, and if I were to say yes, those adjustments would disappear. So I will say yes, and it deletes those adjustments. Now it doesn't give you the option to delete them one at a time. You would be deleting all of them that are eligible, which means that they either have not been paid or they're not posted. So any adjustments that's paid or posted won't be allowed to be deleted. Only the unpaid, unposted adjustments do.
You can't use the add a line or delete a line up on top there to remove an adjustment?
Hang on, we'll get to that in a second. So I can undo my changes here, and it only allows me to undo the last one I did. So if I wanted to delete a detail line here, okay, I could delete that, yes.
Okay.
But this is just kind of a quicker way if you have multiple adjustments that you want to get rid of,
right,
to use the delete all adjustments button. Okay. So if I want to undo that, I can only get the one adjustment back. You could use the detail lines in this case to delete them with the double minus or double plus. So when you're entering a new invoice, if you have more than one detail line, the double plus is what gives you additional detail lines on a new invoice. So I can do the double plus here, and I get a detail line. Again, in the job ID field, I can do an F12. Or if I wanted to, I can start typing the job name, and I would also get a list that would get me as close as it could. I can start typing a phase name, and it would get me to the phase ID list. When you're entering a new vendor or a new invoice, the vendor ID, again, you can either hit F12 or you can start typing in, and it would take you to the vendor. So then I can put in, I can backdate this if I want to date this in January. I can go ahead and I can backdate it to a different date. Now you can have a older invoice date, and the accounting month and year might still need to be February because January's closed, but you wanted to date the invoice in January. You can still do that. put in your dollar amount. I can decide that I should get a discount on this, and I can put in a discount amount. And then I can decide if I want to go to a job or no job. In this case, if I want to do an F12, and let's say I want to put that to maintenance and cleaning, I could do that. I can put in check description. If I save that, and then I print my check, I can go to the screen. Here it shows you your check description, your invoice number, your date, your amount, discounts. If we had a purchase order, the purchase order would also show in front of the date description. If there was a job in a phase, it would show there. So now that I've printed a check, it says check's written, and this is all now gray. I can't delete it. I can't add any detail lines. Can't do anything to it because now it's locked down. If you have to make adjustments to the invoice, you do that through accounts payable adjustments. It gives you the option to enter a vendor, and it gives you the option to enter a job. So again, you can do F12 or type in part of it. If I hit F12, it brings me up to my job list. But let's say I don't want a job, so I'm just going to use all jobs. You are required to have a transaction date and accounting month and year. So I'm just going to use today's date. And then it'll bring up all invoices for either the vendor or the job, depending upon which options or both. You'll see the net invoice column has what the invoice amounts are. It'll show you retention if there's any retention here. And these are also how you would adjust retention when you enter invoices that have retention and then you want to pay the retention. So you have two adjustment columns. You can adjust the amount and you can adjust the retention. So the amount, if I wanted to take off $4, I would do a -4. And it would then take off $4 of this net invoice amount. If I had retention in here, I could do the same thing. I could do a negative of whatever the retention amount is. If I want to add retention to it, I could add retention to it. This vendor must not have, oh, there it goes. Okay. So that would add retention and put retention into this column. So if I click apply, my retention went up and my net invoice went down here. So to adjust retention, you can either click in this column and adjust each line item that has retention, or you can do this adjust retention button. So on this adjust retention button, my job ID on this particular invoice is 10, so I can put in job 10. It shows me what my current job retention percentage is and what my current retention amount is, which matches up here. And I have options. I can adjust retention to 0, which would automatically create negative numbers in this retention adjustment column equal to the amount of my net retention. I can adjust invoices with no retention, basically adding it or taking it off of an invoice that doesn't have retention if I wanted to. I can do it by a certain cost type. I can set the job retention percentage to be 5% if I wanted to bring it down, and then it would only adjust off half of that retention. I can set my retention to be a certain dollar amount, or I can adjust off a certain dollar amount. So for example, if I want to go to 5%, and I say OK, it's going to automatically give me an adjustment amount in here equal to 5% of this. It's not actually, because the invoice amount was different than what's left there, so it's setting it equal to whatever 5% less of what it should have been, not exactly what it is. So if I wanted to adjust off the entire amount of retention, I could do the whole -125, apply that, and it goes back to being 0. Now, in here, you cannot delete any adjustments. You can just make the adjustments. If I wanted to add back onto this invoice, the $4, I could do that. Apply, and if we go look at that invoice, you'll see all these adjustments here. Pension and invoice adjustments. Now, if I wanted to change the dates on these, I could just click in the date field and change the date. If for some reason I wanted the date to be something else than what I did it, I can change the date just by clicking on that and saving it. Or I can use my delete adjustments button, or I can use my individual adjustment, delete. I just want to delete two of them. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and delete them. Select checks will always normally bring you up to this AP Select Checks parameter screen. If it brings you up directly to that list of vendors with all their open invoices, that means that someone has already populated the Select Check screen. Once this screen has been populated, it locks down the invoices that are showing in there. So you could do this by vendor or by job if you want to just pay certain invoices for certain jobs. You can also do it by invoice due date if you want to just pull in invoices that are due by a certain date. You also have the options for EP vendors or non-EP vendors or all. So if you just use the defaults, it's going to pull in all invoices for all your vendors and show you what you owe. So in this case, we're going to do that. So here is the open amounts, any retention that's on there. Now you can't pay retention unless you do an adjustment to it first and move it out of the retention column into the open amount column. So you would need to do a retention adjustment first to pay these dollar amounts that are showing in retention. So let's say, for example, I want to pay this Ace Building Company, but I only want to pay them $100 or $150. Well, I can't get in here to select it to pay. So I have to use this green box with the black arrow and drill into it. When you drill into it, it gives you the invoices that are there. So now I can see discounts, I can see my retentions, and my individual invoices. So let's say I want to pay $100. Well, I still can't click in this field. I still can't get these fields to open up. So I have to use the green box with the black arrow again, drill in one step further. Now I can go into selected to pay. So I'm at the lowest level, I'm at different jobs. So if I just wanted to pay, for example, maybe I just want to pay $100 on this job. So I can then put in selected to pay $100. I can drill back up, and it shows me my selected to pay of $100. Drill back up to the vendor level, and there's my selected to pay of $100. Now I can also select that I want to pay an entire everything just by clicking on the box on the outside here. And if I drill in, it's going to show me that everything is check marked for what I'm paying. Now in here, you'll notice there was something that said image here. If I click on that, there is a document linked to this particular job. So we do have options of document linking. So there was an image linked to this particular invoice. I'm going to uncheck mark this, and I'm going to uncheck mark this. Once you, we'll just do these two. We'll say OK. So once you have selected your checks for payment, it will show you down here how much you've selected to pay. and if you've taken discount. So for example, if you're not eligible for the discount and you wanted to zero the discount out, you would have to drill in here, and you could then zero out the discount amount. And you would drill back up, and the discount is gone. Your discount taken is now 0. Your selected to pay is that amount. So you would say OK. The next thing you would do is go into Reports, Accounts Payable, Pre-Check Register. And then the option to print only invoices to be paid is already automatically checked. So if you say OK, it's just going to show you the report and show you what invoices you selected to pay in that particular instance.
Can you repeat that, what you just did for that report?
So that would be Reports, Accounts Payable, Pre-Check Register. And if you just leave it set to the defaults, it'll show you everything you've just selected to pay.
Perfect.
And that way you can verify it, make sure you've got everything right. You're not overpaying somebody, you didn't forget somebody if you've got multiple vendors on this report. It also gives you a total number of checks that you're going to need, so you know how many checks to print in your printer. After you've verified that, you would go into Accounts Payable and Print Checks. And the Print Check screen would come up. You could enter a beginning and ending vendor, but you don't need to if you want to print for everybody that you've selected. If you just want to print for one of the vendors that you previously selected, then you could enter that information. You would verify that your check number is the next check up, and you can change that date to be a different date if you want to post-date them or date them in the future. You also have options for printing just EP vendor checks if you use that option, or printing just non-EP vendor checks or all. If you're doing the electronic payment checks, you have a electronic payment general ledger account number, which may be the same as your cash general ledger account number, but it could be different. And then the starting electronic check number defaults to a number that is internally stored. So you don't have the option to change that. That is a number that internally gets created, and it keeps track of it internally and increments it by 1 or 2 or however many checks you print. You print 10 checks, it's going to go in order, 1 through 10, give it the next number up, and then it keeps track of that number automatically for you. Your regular paper checks, you have the option to change that to a different check number if you want to. So then if I say OK, it would calculate the checks and print them to the screen, show me what they're going to look like. You can go directly to the printer. You don't need to go to the screen with them. I like to go to the screen because I like to see.
And you just print from here, right? You
right.
can just hit the print button from here.
Right.
Yeah.
Print the print report button right there. Correct.
I like that too.
So one thing, if you have so many invoices on here that there's not enough room for all of them, okay, so they may have 20 invoices that you're paying. They're not all going to fit on the check stub. The check stub would say see attached, and then it would print out a second sheet of paper that has all of your invoices listed, and it would print just a blank paper. See, now this particular one was an EP vendor, which I didn't realize that we were doing that. So this has the EP vendor check number, and it prints out a voided check like your payroll direct deposit does, if you guys are familiar with that. Mm-hmm. This basically would create an electronic file then that it would have this check in there and would be able to be uploaded to the bank. And it'll tell you right here, AP electronic file is created, and it's located on the R drive, CSC Win, data folder, and it's called the EP170215.txt, and it's ready for upload. So you would go to that path, find that file, upload it to your bank. Now, if for some reason the checks didn't print properly, or you dated them wrong, or you need to reprint them, you forgot to load them in the checks, or you forgot to load checks into the printer, you printed them to paper, there is a reprint checks feature. And to reprint checks, you would put in the first wrong check number that you printed, and then the last wrong check number for the whatever range you want to reprint. And then your starting check number would be the new check number that you want to print. So in this case, 1048, and you can't do these for EPs, but the 1048 check was one that we did just now. And let's say I want to keep it 1048, but I want to change the date to yesterday. So I can do that. I can say, okay, it would give me the same check, but just changes the date. It keeps the check number. Or I can make it a new check number if I wish to, because it didn't come out. I didn't get the right check. Check jammed or something happened to it in the printer. I need to produce a new check. So instead of having to select them over again, I can reprint them just by using this option. And I don't have to delete the check, and I don't have to reselect it for payment. Electronic payment is the AP print check screen, just another way to get to it, with the default being EP vendors only. If you then wanted to electronically email your payment information, you would put in the check date, which would be today's date, and you could put in a vendor, or you could put in the electronic check number if you want. You don't have to. It would just email everything that would have a check date, that had that check date on it for electronic payment vendors. And then it would go ahead and populate your email and send it out. So let's see if this will work. Did not have an email address. Okay. Emails will not be sent. Okay. If I do that, and then I do this, one email will be sent. So it automatically sends it, doesn't bring it up to an option. It'll automatically send it to you. I don't see it coming through yet, but take a look for that. So it automatically sends it with the attached PDF showing you what you paid, showing the vendor what you paid. Review void checks is a way to look at what checks that you've paid out. If you need to check to see, when did I pay this? Did I do an invoice, the right invoice? You can't change anything in here. You can't change the invoice number. You can't change the date. You can change the accounting month and year, but that's about the only thing you can change. If you need to redo the check because it was wrong, you would have to delete it with the purple minus key, or you could use the void check option. If you use the void check option, it leaves a $0 check out there. Here's our email that we're going to get for the electronic payment email. And that would then show you basically like a check stub as to what you're paying for that customer or that vendor. So when you void a check, it leaves a $0 check out there attached to the invoice, and you can't get to the invoice to change it. So if you just need to replace the check because they lost it, you could void it and then reprint a check for the same amount, the same information. If you have the wrong job or the wrong amount and you want to change something on it, you would need to delete the check with the purple minus in order to change the vendor or change the invoice. So now I want to look up the check that we just wrote. I can order these by check number. I can order these by check date just by clicking on the heading. And I can see the checks that I've written today. I can bring this check up If I void this check, leaves a $0 check with the void in red. Now my invoice is still going to say that checks are written. So I'm not going to be able to print a new check here. I'd have to go in and select it for payment again. But if I wanted to change something on there, in Review Void Checks, I do a lookup and I order by date, and I go to this $0 check, I can still do the minus key, and I can still delete it. So now that I've deleted it, I can go into File. I can go back to my invoice. Now this is an open invoice, and I have the print check option again. I can add a job because it was supposed to go to a job, or I can change the amount if I need to. Now I can have multiple screens open, and if I want to flip back to my check screen, I can either minimize it using this and get back to it, or I can click up here on Window, and down here at the bottom of Window, it shows you what windows you have open. So I can go back to AP Invoices just by checking on that. If I want to flip easily without having to minimize, I can go and I can just click on the screen that I want to go back to by using the window, and it'll list all my open screens here. Okay, positive pay is another option that you may or may not have that allows you to create a text file that you can upload to the bank. So this is for security purposes where it helps reduce fraud, where the bank will not process any checks through your account unless they have this positive pay file, giving them a list of the checks that are cleared for processing. So basically what that means is that if the check is not in, if they did not receive a file from you with the check numbers listed that you want to allow to be cleared through your account, they will not clear those checks or not process those checks or not honor those checks in the bank. So you can do it for AP and payroll. You can do it as of a check date, so I can create one for the checks I just ran with today's date. And this just does the paper checks. It does not, the electronic checks are automatically okay, so they don't include that. Drill down is a nice feature where you can see what you owe somebody and what kind of work you've done with them in the past. These invoice amounts are as the work you've done with them since the beginning of time. You can drill in here. It will show you each invoice and the dollar amounts of the invoices and the jobs. You can drill in again, and it will show you the jobs and phases for that invoice. Up here you can drill in one more time, and that will show you the checks and the payments or the adjustments made to those invoices. So you can look here, and if somebody wants to know when a check went out, when did you pay this, you could come in here and drill into this and say, well, it went out on January 5th, and the check number was 43478. Even if you want to just see when things were paid, you can come in here and look at that. You can go up, drill back up, and it takes you back up to the different levels that you just drilled down into. You get back up into this level, then you can go drill into the next option if you wanted to. Drill down is kind of a handy feature if you want to see what the status is of your invoices for your vendors. Posting transactions is part of the month-end closing step, and it's on the month-end checklist. To close the month and year and advance it to the next month, you have to check mark that box there. Purging transactions, again, is part of the month-end checklist, and normally you do it on a monthly basis. Some people wait and do it just once a year, basically whatever your company's policy is. Reports, accounts payable. You've got drill down, same drill down as in file, just a different way to get to it. Your vendor list for accounts payable. Just prints a list of your vendors. But the one thing that, one option it does have, it gives you the option to print balances. So if I check mark to print balances, I can then put in an accounting month and year. Let's say I want to see for 2016, what did we do either for a certain vendor or for all vendors? What kind of work did we do with all our vendors? So it shows me the billings, discounts, and payments that we made for the entire year for these vendors. It's kind of like a mini trial balance for vendors only. Labels are, all it is basically one label per vendor. You can't change it. You can't edit it. It just prints whatever's on the employee or on the vendor file address. Pre-check register we went over. That's where you get a listing of your payments that you've just selected for payment, your invoices you've selected for payment. Invoice edit is a list of your invoices for the month. You could go back in time. I could run this for 11 of 15 if I want to, and I can see what I've done at any time, any month. You can go to the screen. You can also print reports to Excel by going to File. So if you go to File, and then you'll have to name it something. If you click on the Browse button, it would ask you basically where do you want to send it to. I like to go to the desktop. It's going to put a file type of Microsoft Excel, and then you could put, AP, invoice edit, 02, 15, 2017. And then that would create this in an Excel file on your desktop. So if I say OK, and I say OK, oh, there's probably nothing to print for that. But it does create an Excel file. You can open it up then and manipulate the columns in Excel. The adjustment edit does the same thing, gives you a list of your adjustments for the month. Show you what adjustments you've done. It's all part of the month-end checklist as well, and they can be printed to file. Same with your check register, list of checks for the month. Shows you the checks that you've written. Also will show you your net change in AP. This is how much your AP aging should be reduced by as far as payments are concerned. It's part of the procedures on the month-end checklist of balancing out your edit reports. Of your agings, you have different agings that you can run. Vendor job invoice totals basically shows you the most information as far as the invoice, the job it went to, and the dollar amount. You can run history report. The history report will show you transactions that were purged as well as current transactions. So history report will give you all the invoices, and then if there's a check associated with it, it will give you that as well. When you purge, it purges paid and posted invoices off of this accounts payable invoices screen as of a certain date. So then it would no longer, the invoice would no longer show up on the screen, but you would still be able to get it in a history. And here's where you print the 1099 forms. It would then print on a pre-printed form, so it just shows it to you on like a blank piece of paper here, but it prints it on a pre-printed form. Admin accounts payable. This is the control file options where things are set up when you first start off with our system, you usually don't have to come in here and change anything. You usually can leave them set the way they are. Control accounts would be the account numbers that things post to when you close out the month. The only thing you might need to change here is if you switch banks and you get a new bank account and you want to default your cash payments for AP to this new bank account number, you would come in here and change it here. Again, you could hit F12. This is going to show you just your bank accounts that you have set up in the system. If you need to reopen accounts payable, you have an unpost transactions option here. In the help file, bear with me a second, my help is not working. Okay. In the help file, accounts payable, under the monthly close, you have the accounts payable month-end checklist. And this is the checklist that you'd use every month to close out accounts payable. Gives you step-by-step instructions, where to go, file, accounts payable, invoices, to enter your invoices, reports, accounts payable, invoice edit, tells you what to uncheck, what to enter. Gives you the verify step of your posting reports. From your edit reports versus your posting report. When you do the post-transaction step to close the month, it produces a report, and you would then take totals. There's a net change total at the end of that posting report that you would take for this amount here. You print your aging, and then you verify the aging steps here. You also have to compare it to the control accounts in General Ledger. So, for example, your accounts payable account in General Ledger should match your accounts payable aging for the month end. And it gives you the option to purge transactions. Help also gives you, if you need to know how to do something. We have different sections about how AP invoices. We also have a how do I section. How do I add a vendor, add a zip code, adjust an invoice? It would then give you instructions on how to do that. You can print any of these by just selecting the print option, and you just print the selected topic, which is already defaulted. That's how you would print out the checklist too, just print the selected topic. Use the print and then say OK. You guys have any questions on any of this?
Not really.
Anything I didn't go through that you wanted to hear about or that you were questioning? No?
No.
Okay.
I can't do anything.
Let me just show you a couple quick things. Up here, across the top here, you have a vendor. I don't know if you ever use these. It's just a quick list of all your vendors. And it's kind of like a Rolodex. You can type and seek. So if I want to find Lowe's, I can type an L, and it takes me to the L's. Okay. So this is just a quick lookup for phone numbers or addresses. You can't change anything in here. You just a quick lookup if you want to look up somebody's information. And that's the same for customers. Just a quick lookup. All these across the top. Just takes you out of it. Edit gives you a list of our shortcuts. If you're a keyboard person, You can do, Control-C or Control-Z to undo. Different for today's, tomorrow's date, week from today. Navigation gives you also shortcuts. So to add a record, it's Control-A. To save a record, it's Control-S. Add a detail line, you could do Control-Insert. Control plus the Insert key. This is just a quick list of things that you can do, keyboard shortcuts. That is about the end of the webinar. That's about all I have to show you. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.
Excellent.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys for attending. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.